So in this course we go more deeply into the whole subject of vitality, which is, it sounds a bit boring, but it's actually not. When we have a lot of free vitality in the system, we're generally much happier and much more able to learn and to think, and there's much more clarity in the mind. We have a greater sense of well-being, we tend to be healthier. And what Bart's teacher Bob left behind was really beautiful systems which help balance the mind and body, brain and body, into a kind of naturalness which allows the spontaneous release of vitality, meaning where it's been blocked, a block can move or dissolve, and then suddenly there is this sense of being at the right place at the right time, happy to be alive, which can be uncommon in day-to-day life, just being happy to be alive. Most of us, all of us, because we are ultimately all interdependent on each other, so our humanness, in a way, is pretty much in a conflict with being alive. And the way we're conditioned in our thinking is out of that conflict with life, in a way. For example, we're our investment in death through not thinking about it, and our fear of death, and our belief that death is the opposite of life, our belief in beginnings and endings, and that we have to somehow survive. This kind of surviving conditioning of survival. It's pretty much, it's not about surviving death, it's about surviving life. And that's a bit silly, because when you really look at it, you see we're running away from something. And the only relief's going to come when we die. And we think death's behind us, but we're running towards it in a way, trying to escape something. And that thing we're trying to escape is often our own vitality. And partly why we ended up like this is because vitality is kind of unconditional. Meaning, if one thing comes to life, everything comes to life. So the very best comes to life, but also the very worst. And we don't like the very worst. So we're ready to kind of sacrifice the very best to avoid the very worst, in a way. So we throw away the love, but we keep the disappointment in love. So we don't love anymore, for example. We don't risk love anymore. Or we kind of give up on happiness because we don't want to have that confrontation with people who are very, very sad, very negative. Because how can you be happy when you're next to a sad person? You can't. It's rude. It's confronting. It feels too painful to be happy next to sad people. But then we all be sad for each other, and then we get more and more depressed, because it's almost like nobody's really allowed to be happy anymore. It's a betrayal. And you see that going through family systems, So vitality has got everything to do with life and energy. So fundamentally everything is energy. There isn't a split between energy and matter. This is, we're still psychologically in this kind of Newton age where we think everything's like working like a machine, and you get down to these fundamental particles which are atoms and they're solid, but they're not. You look inside them and it's just pure energy. All there is energy. Our bodies are dense forms of energy. And the free flow of this energy through a form, through harmony and balance and symmetry, is what vitality looks like. It's not something out there, it's something which shows up when we relax. It's not something we run after to find it, it's something which shows up when we let go of all of the stuff in the way of it. And sometimes, because of the way we're programmed, we have to experience that a few times for the nerve system to begin to trust it. that actually to put things down means you become more alive. Because the way we're conditioned is to collect stuff. Collect, and from this survival place, as if that's somehow going to make us stable. And actually it's when you let stuff go and you open space, or when you travel, or when you release particular thoughts or beliefs, that the vitality is liberated more. So, how do we know that we're alive at all? Because in these courses we're going to work with, always it's going to come down to experiencing over knowing. So we're going to try and put our knowing aside a little bit, humble our knowing a little bit, and ask how we know anything at all about being alive. Like, how would we check right now if we were alive? Like, ask yourself the question, am I alive now? Like, where do you check?
Just know. It's just a knowing.
How do you know that? Before you know it, because knowing can be a thing. There's two kinds of knowing. There's the knowing which was prepared earlier. Because everyone told you you're alive, so you know it. And there is the kind of knowing which is ancient. So in this body, like right now, like, having just got up out of your bed, and you want to check, did I die in the night?
Well, usually it's you check your pulse, don't you? That's every morning. If one is
You've been taking some of what he's
yeah. I used to work in a hospital, so
yes, exactly.
We were brainwashed into checking pulses and looking for signs of life.
Yeah, yeah.
When people are ligatures and things like that in psychiatric wards. So, are you blue?
Yeah.
Or are you pink?
Also, there's this one, isn't there? The first depression point, it's called. It's where if someone's really, really looking dead, you shove your knuckle in there.
So looking at it from a very practical, pragmatic, physical way.
Yeah.
Obviously, I know that.
Yeah. So if you were dead and you were a ghost, would you have a pulse?
No.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
Yeah. Sure. Well,
because the whole universe has a pulse.
Yeah. If you mean vibration, then yes, that would go on, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
To forever.
Yeah.
But in terms of how we check to see if you're alive, it's normally signs of life, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'll change the question. I forgot we had a medic in the room. How do we experience ourselves as being alive?
I felt like my initial response when you asked the question is that I'm experiencing through.
Yeah. Through what?
This.
What's this? It's not a trick question, it's just like, what is this when you say this? Do you mean your body, or do you mean your spirit?
It's just a sense of looking through some kind of vessel. There's a throughness to my looking.
So there's a looking. So partly you experience life through seeing. Yes?
Yeah, and also the experience that's coming through this nervous system.
Yeah. So one way we experience ourselves as being alive is through seeing, through observing, right? Getting impressions. Things are moving, they're not the same, and it feels alive. If nobody moved, it would feel less alive, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I guess. It's true.
We're aware.
Exactly. There's an
awareness.
awareness.
We can really say we don't know what's happening. I don't know what this is or what I am. But I'm aware.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So awareness. What would awareness be without the physical senses?
Just where there wouldn't be anything to be aware of. It would just be awareness in itself, wouldn't it? Just ising.
Hissing in the rain. I'm hissing in the rain.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because what we're talking about is the senses, the physicals, our ability to sense. When we're talking about awareness, we're talking about our ability to sense. And awareness is like when you take away the physical senses. And but then, if you really stay there with awareness, and so you're not seeing, you're not hearing, they have these tanks in America where you cut out all, sensory deprivation tanks. There's an awareness, and the awareness still has a certain quality. And it doesn't have to be like the divine Buddha quality. It can be quite a depressed quality. Quite a kind of sense of negativity can be in the awareness. We could sense that, like a kind of background of when am I getting out of this tank, like a waiting.
Is that still an awareness of something, though? Awareness of that quality?
There is awareness, and there is a vibration within awareness.
Mm.
That's why people do it, because they liberate those core vibrations, which are not pure in a way. That sounds judgmental, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's a sense of like aliveness.
Yes.
Not I am alive, just aliveness, like a busyness.
Yeah, a
like
subtle sense of aliveness.
A vitality.
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
is what it is.
Yes.
It's like
Exactly.
sort of, which can be picked up by the senses, and you could say it's a sensory experience, but it seems to be beyond the senses as well.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like this zzzness.
Yes, exactly.
Beyond the practical things like checking pulse or those things.
Yeah.
It's just this something is flowing through this vessel, through this filter called the ego and the body and the mind and the experience.
Yes, yeah. So what we've got is that something's flowing through this more solid form of the body, or ego, or mind, or separate self, whatever you want to call it. This me. Something's flowing through it in two directions.
Can I ask a question?
What?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So if in I had one experience of being in an operation, of being aware of being in the operation. So if at that point in that memory of mine where I felt like I was just awareness and there wasn't any looking through, it was just that, and I had no sense of like, it's interesting what you say about I had no sense of the physical or being through like that. Yeah. So what then are you talking about, the buzzing being in that kind of, like what's the difference between that?
That the whole spectrum is possible, and awareness all the way to complete non-awareness. So when you're in a sensory deprivation tank, there's still quite a buzzing of vitality because you still are in a body, even though you're not getting the sensory information back again. When you're under anesthetic like that, you're in a much purer state of awareness if you're aware at all. And then a little bit you're not aware, and a little bit you are aware. So
but
that's
you're alive.
You know you're alive. Yeah.
You're basically witnessing yourself. So it's more consciousness because there's not this deep feeling connection of what's happening. You're looking at what you're happening. So you're there outside and watching yourself.
I didn't see my body, I just was the awareness.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
How is that different from being dead then?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
That's one to ponder, isn't it? It's almost like you know what it is to be dead.
Life taught me something.
Life was good for something. Okay, so what we're talking about is, in these courses, we're really trying to bring an integrated and grounded way to make a qualitative difference to daily life. So meditation is great, and all these experiences of being outside of a body have their place in naturalness, but they're most richly experienced when they're not in an either-or configuration of like, now it's my regular life, I finished meditating, I'm going to go and take a pee, and now I'm in my holy life. We're looking for every little moment of integration is like gold, because the miracle is really here in the physical, and the opportunity is here in this little lifetime that we've got. So The classic answer to how we know experience, and it doesn't matter, but ourselves as being alive, is we tend to check in on our senses. We feel the air on our face, we kind of like the pulse, we make a little nip, we open our eyes. Oh yeah, I'm here, I'm alive. And it's an interesting question where we are the rest of the time, when we're not checking in on being alive, because it seems we go into some kind of fog. Like the whole morning can go by and we weren't there at all, and we're not quite sure where we were, and we weren't really aware either. So there is something happening in the here and now when we check in on our physical senses, on aliveness, when we open the senses for a moment, when we align the brain with the senses of the body. And that partly what's happening is that there's a quickening of vitality. We feel more alive. When we really open our eyes and we say, whoa, look at that sky, look at that cloud, and we really let it in. There's a sense of greater aliveness. It's like a blessing almost of aliveness, of vitality. And when we're very, very depressed or in suffering, then our senses tend to close down. The colours become duller, and we notice much less with our eyes. We don't even want to see. And it can feel like if we open our eyes, it's too painful to see what's there. So better watch Netflix, or because it numbs the pain, comfortably numb. And our sense of hearing becomes just functional in a way. So we just listen enough to get the information that we need, like, is that a bus coming, or is that a person screaming, getting killed, or is this person talking to me? I should maybe look like I'm listening. So
I'm trying.
Our sense of touch collapses in a way. We can walk the whole day and we don't feel our own body. We don't feel the texture of the clothes that we're wearing. We don't feel the earth beneath our feet. It's all a bit depressing, being depressed.
Would you say that's a frozenness?
Yeah.
Like a numbness?
It's like a narrowing, because if you really look at the senses, they are like the organs of consciousness. And the brain is the big organ in a way, but we've got lots of organs. But a place where consciousness is really flowing with it information in both directions is through our eyes, through our ears, through our sense of touch. So it's an organ in the sense of, ideally it would just be a channel, it would be an open tube, and information flows in towards the source of the universe, which is inside ourselves, the source of life, because all of us are the source of life. It couldn't be otherwise. And something flows outwards at the same time, because whatever flows in flows out. Something expresses. There's an expression of life going in both directions. But we have, just like the eye has the iris, which is filtering light, we have a kind of psychological filtering on our senses. So we narrow the amount of information we're ready to take in, which is quite right, because this is what allows us to concentrate or to tune into a particular atmosphere. It allows us to switch channels of information. But this ability to adjust the lens of the senses, or to adjust the radio knob of our listening, to adjust our sensitivity. This ability is something which is really, really wonderful when you begin to master it, when it works for you. Meaning you can say, okay, I don't want to hear the collective mind anymore in England, it's really depressing, I'd rather tune into Nisargadatta, or what's happening, with my beloved, or what it's like to be an eagle, or a butterfly. You can attune. That's fun. Or to really, really use the eyes is really, really being able to be supported by the light and the information, rather than using the eyes in a survival way, which is where's the threat? Where's the threat? Where's the danger? So the way the sad state of affairs is that we are enslaved to our senses often, in that we're not mastering them, they're mastering us. And that begins very young, this kind of reflex to not want the monster to see you, and then you cover your own eyes, There's this kind of blocking of this vitality that moves through the senses. And if it didn't start at that age, it starts later on at school when we're told to sit still and to numb ourselves, to numb our vitality. Sitting in a classroom listening to God knows what uninteresting rubbish from some very boring teacher and not being able to move or not even really being allowed to doodle. That's quite a hammering on the senses in a way. It's like a numbing down, a dumbing down. Actually, there was some NASA research about children, and they found that all babies are born genius and they get dumbed down directly by the education systems. In, I think somewhere in the northwest, near Liverpool, there was a school which was the lowest scorer on the target schools list. They were really rubbish, and they were all immigrant refugee children speaking different languages and nobody understanding anybody else. And they were really, really, really bad school, the lowest of the low. And they introduced music lessons, something like 4 or 5 hours a day, music. And the other bit was just the most basic obligatory language and mathematics. And they went up to like the top 10 in absolutely no time. So that says a lot about the power of the senses in liberating, even one sense, the sense of listening, the sense of hearing. Of course, it brings in, when they do music together, these little kids, it brings in also belonging. It's a form of communication. It's changing the whole neurology, the whole physiology. So we have more than just 5 senses, you know. In the crudest way that we're educated, we're told we have 5 senses, but that's a myth. We have hundreds of senses. So when we talk about the 5 senses, we're just talking the language of the myth of 5 senses, but actually we have the sense of gravity, which is how we are basically unified in that. So it's not that interesting to us because everybody's caught in the same law, but you can feel your own weight or heaviness. You can feel mass. We've got a sense of temperature, hot and cold, which is, like all the senses, blissfully subjective. Meaning if you're hot on the inside, it's going to feel cold on the outside, and vice versa. You know, so it's really subjective impressions. We've got a sense of time, which is really cool. You know, like a biological clock. And sometimes, you know, that goes offline and we completely, like in Glastonbury, and we just completely feel the elasticity of time. We swim in it. And in meditation, sometimes that happens. We have a sense of spatial awareness of where our body is in the context of the rest of the room. In fact, we imagine our whole body to be here. It's not how it's directly experienced if we don't bring in more information of the senses. It's a concept that you have a body. You're just dreaming it up moment by moment. You only really begin to experience this body when you begin to open the sense of touch. The beautiful thing about the senses is that they can only be opened in the here and now. So you're instantly in the here and now. All of non-dual teachings is about coming into the here and now. And the moment you open any sense, you move from this fogland of thought, which aren't even your own thoughts often, into the here and now of being alive. And that's very, very vitalizing. So, all the senses, they are literally like varying different channels of information, in a way. So none of them are absolute. So seeing is not believing. You know, you get impressions. I get impressions of the flowers here, but the way I'm getting the impressions of the flowers is not absolute, because the way Paul is seeing them is completely different, totally different perspective. And he might be completely triggered by the particular shade of pink, and I'm totally in the green. You know, it's incredibly subjective. And part of the liberation of the senses and of vitality is in finding peace with that subjectivity. You know what I mean by subjective, right? It's only you are experiencing that in this moment, and what's more, it's not going to be the same if you look at it again. You're not going to get the same experience back later. which means you really need to open up in the present moment. Because it's not repeatable, it's not a rehearsal, it's a one-time shot each moment. So why would we have a problem with subjectivity, that our individual way of seeing the colour red is maybe totally different from the way our neighbour sees the colour red? Why would we struggle with that?
What do you mean struggle? What would the idea that it might all be different and that's disconcerting?
Yes.
It could be because the myth that there's an objective, real red out there is one that we've bought into that isn't actually.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. There's something reassuring in the idea that everybody experiences everything exactly the same. So one of the contractions or blocks that can come forward in opening the senses is the sense of rejection. Because if all you lot say that this is how you're experiencing red and only I experience it different, then I'm out of the pack. I'm rejected. It hurts. It's isolating. It's painful. It's not pleasant. So we have this drive to conform, to experience things the same way, which, when it's free, it looks like a beautiful dialogue and conversation with many perspectives building up an overall picture. But when it's fear-based, it becomes like conformity. It becomes like, we all have to look the same, do the same, dress the same, think the same, feel the same. Education. So that's one block that shows up around this idea, this permission to have a totally unique experience through this body-mind or through that body-mind. A totally different, unique experience. And of course there's always this formula that the more we can allow out the uniqueness of our own experience, the more we're able to appreciate the uniqueness of somebody else's experience. So there's a flip that happens where life becomes very, very rich. You really want to know about everybody else's experience because it's amazing. But if we can't take on our own uniqueness, then we have a bit of a problem taking on other people's. It's kind of logic, isn't it? Yeah. So the another block that can come up with allowing this subjectivity of experience is loneliness. It can feel very, very, very lonely to not really to be able to completely share an experience. We can describe it, we can write poetry, we can sing it, we can wander around telling and telling and telling, but there's a feeling that they'll never get the essence of it. Nobody really knows how it is for me. And that's full of woundedness. It's painful. On one level it's painful. On the next level, when we can move through that pain, it's very liberating. Why? Because when we begin to say, okay, but I'm going to open my senses anyway and I'm going to really experience how it is for me. Who cares if anyone knows how it is for me or not? Who cares? Where do we get to believe that other people have to know how it is for me to have it how it is for me? You follow the loop? Like we're asking permission from everybody else to be able to open our senses and to be alive. Yeah? So at a certain stage there's a flip and it's like, you know what, even if nobody ever gets it, I'm going to live. I'm going to experience this little amount of time that I've got to live here in a physical body which is changing all the time anyway. There's a kind of almost a rageful flip, and then we open up the senses, and then what comes forward is this vitality which is incredibly affirming. You see the sky, it's like you come to life. And then there's this magic where you don't care if anybody else knows it or not. You can say, hey, check out the sky, it might be good. But it's not like a kind of survival thing. It's not like an antidote to the pain of loneliness anymore. That they should see the sky how you see the sky. So you can see it's a little bit like opening the senses is a little bit of training of the nervous system. Because it's only by experiencing that little bit of pain, that little bit of resistance, that little bit of reluctance or sadness, that we begin to realize that it's worthwhile anyway to be alive. It's kind of quite a flip, isn't it? It's like worthwhile to be alive, to undepress the senses, to sample a bit what it is to be here, to try it out, to dare that. So, 5 senses, the classical, the seeing, the hearing, the touching, the tasting, the smelling. All of them are based on sensing, and another way to say sensing is feeling. So in a way they're all connected with the sense of touch. Because touch is like the front line, it's like the crudest of senses, but that's actually where we feel things in the physical. Like the touch of the air on our face. So when light comes in through our eyes are touched by the impressions from the light. And it creates signals, and the signals are transferred and processed by the brain into an image. It's quite a long route until you actually see. That's why they tend to talk about direct seeing as being in the inner senses as opposed to the outer senses, because we go through quite a process. It's upside down, we turn it around with the eyes. But nevertheless, it's a movement in which we, in order to really see, if you really feel that with the eyes, to really see, just like with touching, it's a movement of softening. It's a movement of opening. It's almost like we remove the filters, so I'm looking at you, but I can see him at the same time. The peripheral vision comes alive. The light comes alive. Textures come alive. Depth comes alive. So the movement we make is one of relaxation in opening the sense of sight, for example. Can you feel that? There's a softening. So now I'm not just looking at you or avoiding looking at you. I've also got the curtains, I've got... and the moment I relax the eyes like that, I get details as well. So the mind, the thoughts stop grasping towards a fixed impression, a projection, and it begins to take in more and more and more information, and it can take in more and more information, more and more impressions, because there's a relaxation, because there's a softening. You begin to become aware of the shadows. You begin to become aware of subtle movements in the peripheral vision. There's something beautiful happens with the softening of sight. And it's the same with hearing. And with hearing as well, we are touched by vibration, but now it's another kind of touching. It's like inside the inner ear. Again, it's quite a process when you're talking about physical sound. It's quite a processing mechanism through the outer ear and the inner ear and the little echo chamber that's there into the brain, which interprets what the strange sounds that it's hearing. But again, it's the same principle. When we soften the sense of hearing, we relax it, we stop filtering, we stop selecting, we stop censoring, then other qualities begin to come forward when we stop grasping. So, as opposed to what's being said in English, you begin to get a sense of the constriction of the voice, or the quality of the voice, or of other sounds which are there in the room at the same time. Can you follow?
No, absolutely. I was just thinking about it in relation, it's kind of the relaxing of that dogmatic belief in kind of separateness.
Yes, exactly.
That one thing has to be one way, or the other thing has to be the other way. And I don't think you can even call that non-duality, at least I don't think so, because it's not, you can call it what you want. Mm-hmm. There's no kind of, it's like, it reminds me when I was a child, I used to read a lot of books about King Arthur, and I could never sort out the fact that Guinevere had to either be with Arthur or Lancelot, like romance or responsibility. Duty. yeah, exactly, and that's kind of repeated through my own life in various ways. But as Guinevere, but no, essentially.
Who is your Lancelot?
There's been a lot of Lancelots, a lot of Guineveres, and all of it. But anyway, Yeah, but it was, what I'm really getting at is this kind of relaxing of that belief.
Yeah.
There has to be this kind of choice.
Yeah. And what do you think would make that like impulse, like, okay, I'm going to taste this carrot, been there, done that, it's over with. What would be the background state of the nerve system that would generate this belief? That it's like a one snap of the flowers, seen the flowers, know that they're, been there, done that. Like this movement out of experiencing into get a snapshot, know it, and close the shop.
What do you see that as a positive thing or as a
No, I think the whole thing is fear-based.
Yes.
Let's close this experience of being alive. Let's close up this vitality as quickly as possible because something horrible might happen if we let ourselves be free and natural. It's a deep conditioning of the nervous system which we've all undergone, that it's not safe to be alive.
We get a thorough training in that, don't we?
Yes.
From day one.
Yes, exactly. In so many different forms. Yeah.
And also, like, in order for us to be safe, we need to get as much as information constantly as possible.
Yeah.
So I already know what the carrot is all about. I don't need to spend some time with that. I'll move to the pear.
Yeah, yeah.
Categorizing is control, and control is
Yeah.
safety.
Yeah. So there's a belief that we would be more safe if we know exactly everything about everything everywhere. And it's an illusion, this belief, because we can categorize everything. So we know about the flowers, we know the shoes, we know his name and all of this, and get everything categorized. But that takes vitality to hold everything. And it's all old news based on snapshots we prepared earlier. And meanwhile, a great big elephant could be about to fall through the ceiling, and we wouldn't even feel it coming because our senses are dumbed down because we only opened them slightly earlier to get a snapshot. That was a really bad example.
It's not, because even if the elephant fell down, the mind has a way to fill in the blanks and to put meaning onto it and to put, a tidy narrative around it, which isn't anxiety provoking or ambiguous. It will inevitably say there's a zoo above this building, and that's okay somehow, or it might not, but it will attempt to at least.
What will happen when the elephant crashes through the ceiling is we go into a state of shock. Actually, our consciousness, because it's completely out of any context. It's not how we've got things categorized and everything, and that shock is basically going to become a trauma. But that's the same kind of shock we go into when there's a conscious awakening, meaning our mind is broken open and the categories and the filing cabinets and everything, it's all worth nothing, and there's an elephant here, and what are we going to do? Yeah.
So you're saying that when there's shock, the senses are closed even more?
No.
Or they open?
Both is possible.
That's what I was thinking. They can either be fully opened.
Yeah.
There's this thing about if you're driving a motorbike and people describe it, when they have accidents, that everything slows down.
Yeah.
And that the expanded vision happens, and it's a split second feels like 10 minutes or more.
Yes, exactly.
And so the senses are fully open, full vitality.
Yeah.
Then it can then close down into shock and trauma and frozenness.
Yeah, into trauma and frozenness. Yeah. So this is maybe the next thing. Sorry, you want to say?
I was just going to say, is it maybe the same mechanism that we create a self with this putting into boxes? The mind likes to categorise and know what everything is, and it takes for granted that I'm a self in a world. Rather than questioning that, it just goes along with all the concepts because it's already categorised and filed it away.
Totally.
And already knows.
So when you begin to open the senses and you begin to just open the sense of touch, like feeling your foot inside its sock on the floor, and feeling the sense of the body on the chair. You just open up the sense of touch. Then where is yourself then?
It's fully immersed in that.
Yes, it's melting inside the experience of the sense of gravity actually and touched both. So we numb our senses in order to be somebody. Remember who I am, get my head together. Which has its place. We're not judgmental about that. We need that, but again, we want it to work for us and not us to work for it. We don't want to get imprisoned in being somebody. We want to be able to be somebody else when necessary.
Play with the character.
Exactly. And as authentically as possible. because of the realization of the nature of the character.
Yeah, so you're not talking about doing away with like self as in so much kind of conventional sometimes, no, which is I think a really interesting point to make, because otherwise you get stuck in a completely spiritual versus kind of non-spiritual polarity or whatever. But it's a
the more we can play with our different personas and not believe that we are them, the more the kind of essential flavors of our own being comes forward, and that's incredibly unique also, and the less it matters as well. There is a kind of liberation there, but it's not what you would think in terms of like get rid of my ego and get rid of my personality and deny myself donuts and stuff. So the senses. We're leading naturally to the next point, which is that the senses and vitality are flowing, the senses turn in two directions. We have our outer senses and we have our inner senses. So we have our outer sight when we're looking out into the light, or gazing into the darkness of the night, for example, or our outer touch. And we've got our inner touch. So when we close our eyes, when we deprive ourselves of the sense of sight, there is a seeing which is still happening. There's an inner sight. And it's the same part of the brain. Only now it's much less conditioned in a way, but happily they didn't educate us about meditation yet too much, because it hasn't been messed with. There's much more freedom, it's much more private, there's much more space to see. The only thing is that we've been educated out of using our inner sight. But for every single child, when he or she goes to bed at night and closes their eyes, the inner sight appears. They're gazing into a kind of inner darkness and wondering, what is sleep? How am I supposed to do that? And there's a kind of familiarity about it. There is this inner sight. Every child dreams. This is inner vision. We're able to play with images often, or at least to experience patterns of light and darkness. And not all, and we can begin by doing it around the eyes, but we can actually do it through the cells of the body as well at a certain stage, when the sense of sight really relaxes. Because the brain will translate all kinds of impulses into images. From the whole field of impressions, it can translate information into an image. So also what you're feeling in the depth of your kidneys, or what you're feeling in the depth of your neighbour's kidneys, or what you're sensing as needed, as the next portion of your direction in life. All of this can get translated into images by the inner sight. The beautiful thing is that the inner sight will open and relax and open more freely according to our relaxation and opening of our outer sight. It's the same sense. They play together, and the more we meditate and open and the inner sight opens, the more the outer sight becomes clearer too. There is this clarity that comes forward in physical seeing outwardly after meditating sometimes, where the colours seem a little bit brighter and we notice more. So all of the senses turn both ways, because they are channels from the source of life into the world, and from the world into the source of life. They're expressive and they're receptive. So they all have an inner version, only there's much more space on the inside, often. We're taught that there's nothing there on the inside. If you can't hear anything out there, and if you can't see anything, then there's nowhere to go, nowhere else to go. Like all of reality is out here. So we're living on half a leg in a way we've been educated, that it's just what's out here, which is to be sensed. And if you get too sensitive, and most children are sensitive, and you begin to report what you're experiencing in here with your senses, then there's a big fear of insanity that comes forward, which we tend to put onto our children. You're imagining it, there is no voice in your head. Like uncle, no.
So
So it's the same principle also in the opening of the inner senses. It's the same principle of a softening and a relaxation. We can't go hunting to hear something. We can't go searching for a vision. It's much more of a falling back in a relaxation inside as the source of life, a kind of normalness in a way, a kind of commonplaceness. It's that stage in meditation when you give up because you've had it and it's boring and you just decide to just be yourself and sit there with your eyes closed. That's when experience often comes forward because we let go of that last bit of control. You recognize that? Yeah. So this is also truly amazing because you recognize that? That moment. Yeah.
Oh, fuck, I'm just gonna take a nap. And you may not. Or you may.
That's why naps are great in meditation, because there is this movement of like a giving up control, and then there are these kind of in-between bits. Yeah, exactly.
I'm lying to myself and my wife once I go for a meditation now. It's pretty much all naps, but
I think I seriously confused our children by telling them I'm meditating with them.
Deep meditation with snoring. So transcendent.
It's like lying there and hearing somewhere far, far away, she's not sleeping, she's meditating. No, she's sleeping, look at her. She's dribbling. Far, far away. And I'm thinking, no, I'm meditating, I can hear you.
But still drooling at the same time.
Mine's fully drooling.
That's the next workshop.
Crash course. So listening on the inner world, it can be as simple as literally mindfulness of thoughts. That's actually listening. That's the inner ear, in a way. If your thoughts are verbal and in English or in a language. And that, again, the movement of softening. So the movement of softening isn't trying to stop your thoughts and not have them anymore so that your brain will be silent. It's not a reactive movement. It's a movement of allowance, of softening. The listener inside ourselves. So the listener inside ourselves would be curious when we're having a thought about this voice inside our head. Like, is that even my voice? I mean, whose voice is that? It doesn't even sound like me, but then what? I don't know what I sound like either. Like sometimes it sounds like a man, and it's thinking of me. So the listener can be curious about that, the tone of the voice, the emotional quality of the voice, of the thinking voice. It's a voice. It can be listened to, but that involves a softening in a way.
It's just like agitation, in a way.
Yeah.
It's just a bundle of agitation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which can be expressed through that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So a lot of people's teachers say that when you get rid of that thinking voice, then you're free. But it's not true, because then what you hear is the agitation. So you don't need to even at a certain stage give it language, but you've got this in the silence, you know. Not fair, not fair, not fair. There's an atmosphere in the silence of the mind which we can also listen to. That's why a lot of Zen teachings go into listening to the silence, because it's not like, oh, silence, been there, done that. Silence is a whole field of experience in itself which can be listened to. You know, there's a whole difference between a loving silence inside yourself, or a peaceful silence inside yourself, or even a silent silence, and a rageful silence.
But it's not necessarily the absence of noise.
No.
It's the background.
Yes, exactly.
And so when you hear someone like Tale or others talk about the space between your thoughts, go there, be that.
Yeah.
So how do I do that?
Yeah.
How do I stop this?
Yeah.
So you work hard and you get agitated about being agitated.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
practice, and then you just give up.
Yes, exactly. So this is the thing.
Well done,
so if we're having agitated thoughts, and so we've been doing a lot of mindfulness training, to get rid of this agitated thoughts. And so there is no more anything being said inside the head. So what's left is this silence. So we start to listen to the silence, and the silence is an agitated silence, right? So what's it asking for? What is this agitation made of? Because the listener is curious. So if you listen to the agitation, you're going to begin to get...
Sometimes it feels like pent-up vitality.
Exactly.
Energy, isn't it?
It's that life which we're rejecting.
Yeah.
It's vitality which wants to be liberated. So in the sense of an agitated atmosphere of silence in the head, it needs space in a way. It's like we try and keep it inside our head. That's a myth, that's conditioning, that we've only got so much space for our silence inside our head. We can take the whole sky as the space, let the whole sky be agitated. Enjoy it, change the attitude towards it. Enjoy the agitation which is there in the field of silence. Then maybe we suddenly recognize, oh God, that's just like my dad. That's like the family home. And then it's a little bit of a reunion. Yo! I do have a history. You follow? It's like this softening movement can lead to the expansion of information which is possible. It means we can be here, because the senses are in the here and now, it means we can give a huge space and we can take all the time. And then we get the pure seeds of the agitation, the kind of essential aspect, like the vitality of it, as opposed to the agitation, the inner conflict with agitation. So again, it's a softening movement in which we kind of clear space in the inner world. And when the inner world is clear, the inner listener is more liberated, then the attunement to sounds in the outer world gets much easier. So what does that mean? It means we're much less bothered by sounds in the outer world. So they can be hammering a nail in the neighbours, and it's annoying, but it's not overpowering to the point of despair. Because we're much more free in our attunement. We don't grasp onto things. There's not an oversensitivity. Because there's all the space on the inside. You follow?
Is there also a sense that even deeper level of meditation, that you realise that you are actually creating all of this anyway? So you're talking about thoughts or whatever comes forward, but I think there's a moment even before that where you realise you, whatever the you is bringing all of these things into form. And that's a very interesting thing in terms of like belief and how we create. Yeah. I've touched that a couple of times, and it's kind of like shit. Then I'm really responsible.
Yes, exactly.
Because I'm kind of doing all of it in some way. I don't mean that in like a weird schizophrenic way, like it's all me. I sort of mean from my, in my experience.
Yeah. So there is, within the source of life itself is a field of infinite possibility. This is physics, like beyond every universe that's born, there's a field of infinite possibility. Everything is possible in the present moment. And we are that source of life. That's who we are. So everything is possible in any moment. But we're not separate from... We don't separately exist from the infinite field, which means we don't separately exist from each other. And it's a small planet. So we can have this experience if we've struggled, for example, with issues around responsibility and authority, like I have to get permission from the outside in order to come to life and everything. So they can touch this moment of the infinite field inside ourselves. And it's like a liberation from authority. I am the authority. Absolutely true. But you don't exist separately. So you're responsible not just for Max, you're responsible for the whole universe.
Yes, exactly. And in that moment, that's why you can start to allow the authority of others.
As a game. Allow it or disallow it. It's up to you. What fits in the moment. Do both at the same time, allow it and disallow it.
You can also allow your aversion
Oh yeah, of course.
And have compassion for your aversion.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing is that there is such a resource in this field, in these moments of realization, like I am that. You're describing like a moment of I am that.
Yeah.
I am the source of everything, and a felt moment, an experienced moment. So there is such a resource available, but we're not in control anymore. And the problem is that the Hollywood guys go and say you can manifest your reality and you can get rich, but it's not like that.
Exactly. you have that realization and you're like, why are my thoughts still so fucking stupid?
And why am I still depressed?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because there's work to be done here with the field of depression. That's all it is. But still, we don't get this instant kind of throw off the whole human body and the human psyche thing, because we came here for a purpose.
And also, since going back to the senses, we're talking about the seeing, the hearing, I would add even the smell and the sense of gravity and all of that. It's not that easy, because since you mentioned like a contraction or agitation, so for me personally, for example, depending, like it is the same contraction in a way, but depending on whether it's the sight or the sense of gravity or the thought vibrations, they in a way they need different type of attention or a focus.
Yeah.
So when it's on a mental level, it needs something completely else.
Yeah.
When it's in the hip, like it is now, it needs something else.
Yeah.
And sometimes when it's just this general like field of agitation, it might be as simple as, fuck, I want to go out for a run.
Yeah.
And then, you know.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, the navigation, like on paper, it sounds easy. But sometimes I feel like it's even hard to recognize that it's the same agitation, but depending on through which channel one is observing it, it may sound and feel even a little bit different. Like, oh my goodness, like this burning hip pain thing is the same as on perceived through, let's say, the mental channel. This like by a place of rejection and you motherfucker and your body isn't you know, whatever. And it looks different. And
So
there was no question.
that's absolutely true, and because you know our capacity to experience is endless, and the amount of information that's out there is endless, and there is a magic going on in terms of what's needed, in terms of the information that we take in, and because a lot of information comes straight through and out the other side into the source of the universe, because we don't entangle with it, we don't touch it, but some information is there because we need it in order to grow and evolve ourselves. In a way.
Can I offer another view? But something's become clear to me recently, and what you were just tapping on there is that it appears whatever we are, broken into these individual cells, seems to love collecting experiences in every possible infinite way. And so there is no mistake. So even an experience of depression and sadness and grief, and it's all collected. It's not a mistake. At some level, we want that. Obviously, we want to be here and to help maybe navigate back to a happier state. So that's also wanted. So there's no mistake here either. But sort of that's been very clear that that's actually. It doesn't. People don't like it. Most people don't like it when you say this, but there are no mistakes. At some level, you want this.
Absolutely.
Like we were experiencing. It's really strange.
It's like I've done this all to myself.
Well, what we're saying when there's no mistakes, actually everything is a mistake. It's all mistakes. There's all mistakes. But what he's really saying is there's no good and bad. That's a whole difference. Because if mistakes are bad, then there's no mistakes. But if mistakes are not good or bad, then mistakes are kind of fun. It's playful. It's a playground.
It's a playground.
But what you're saying is the source of all we are loves us to experience. So that means when you open the senses, there's a charge of love that can come forward. And then you said something about accepting. So there's a charge of the sense of belonging that comes forward. When we feel connected, the senses connect us to our environment. So when we open the senses, we get the sense of belonging. It comes forward very strongly, and that's the sense. Very different from the sense of rejection, the sense of isolation, the sense of separation. It's possible. It's for sure when that which is experiencing things through us, or that which we are. It's all semantics. It's all words. but that which is alive is at peace with all experience. And if we aren't conscious of that in the middle of it, we do at the end of it. You know what I mean? In all the gaps, it's like the silence, the peace is always there. So there can be a whole noise of experience. We can say this isn't very peaceful, but the peace was always there. It's what's allowing the experience to happen. And it goes back to peace.
Like
Every cycle of experience comes back to peace. So
it's like watching different films, isn't it? You go
Totally.
to watch a horror.
Yeah.
I think we enjoy that. We enjoy
Yeah.
horrors. We
Yeah.
enjoy romances. We enjoy really sad films. We
Yeah.
also enjoy comedies.
Yeah.
It's all. But the whole time we're watching the film,
Yeah.
aren't we? We're
Yeah.
never actually fully involved. We
Yeah.
know we're kind of safe in the background somewhere.
exactly.
And I think we've just, as humans, we've actually forgotten
Yeah.
almost the whole way. We've thrown ourselves in the whole way. Most of it's like 99%.
Yeah.
And really, it's quite brave to do
Yes,
that.
exactly.
It's a bit fucking mental, really, to
Yeah.
throw yourself our way and completely
Yeah.
forget you're actually safe the whole time.
Except that deep down, maybe we didn't forget.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's
That's
just a
what
kind
we
of
say.
blip in conditioning. You know, there's a passion also in life to experience. There is a patience as well, a timelessness. The universe can wait forever for us to move through an experience. We don't have to rush it. You know, it's not a race. So a lot of these are non-dual qualities which come forward simply through endeavouring to open the senses, the physical senses, and that's quite a long way from the old mystical thing of like you're not your body, you know, because this is really an invitation to the opposite movement of like sanctifying the senses in a way, like really exploring them. At least let's check out what they're all about. Now, one last thing before we take a break. There is absolutely nothing wrong with filtering information. It's a natural protective mechanism. It's how we attune, it's how we focus, it's the core of discernment. To discern something is to really see details, to see clearly, to see all the shades of grey. It's all blessed. It's just that we got hijacked by a kind of fear state in our nerve system right now. We're quite traumatized as a people, as a species, humanity. And so we are getting filtered out when it's not entirely necessary anymore. It's to do with the development of mind and the realization of mind and the evolution of the brain. But basically, we have to be a bit active in returning to our naturalness and opening the senses and resourcing the senses. So this course is going to support the opening of vitality, including lots of these kind of brain-fucking things of the senses and self-image, the source of vitality in life.
Can I just ask one question then? So you said that beyond the 5 there are hundreds of senses you listed.
Sense of truth, sense of belonging, sense of peace, sense
You're
of freedom.
overwhelming me now.
You got the list.
I've got about 5 down. That'll be for a Zoom call or something another time. But yeah, so my sense, for lack of a better word, is, and it's a question, but it's also, I guess I'm looking for confirmation in a way. That's one sense, but they manifest in hundreds of different senses. Does that make sense? Like, what is that one sense? Too many senses,
absolutely
isn't there?
right. There's one, you can even rephrase it, there's one, and then we go beyond the human species completely, and even maybe beyond this planet, but there is one ability to sense.